Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Today, myself and Simon are just going to have a quick conversation to try and answer a simple question about lead generation and to offer some ideas and tips you can hopefully implement in your own work. We hope you find it of value. Welcome back. I'm your co-host, Daniel Hopewell, joined by Simon Delaney, and the title of today's pod is What Would Happen If Brands Thought Like Lead Generators? But before we get into that, I just want to make a quick point, a quick admin point, and say this is now the 25th episode of the podcast, which maybe that doesn't seem like a lot that you're listening, but for us, I think to get to 25, one a week quite quickly, I'm quite proud of that, and it's gone quite quickly. We've learned quite a bit. So just before we kind of get into the main pod, Simon, 25 episodes in, have you learned anything particular? Anything that surprised you? What do you think are the highlights?
The first, it's great to be at 25. I think when we'd have started, if we'd have said we get to 25, it was obviously always the aim, but it's a bit of difficulty at the beginning before you nail down the process and everything. But I think what's really resonated with me with all the guests, so we haven't necessarily had 25 guests because some have been internal, but we've probably had 20, maybe 21, is the belief, the sort of shared belief in transparency to a large degree. And whether that's just more like the type of people we've invited in or a wider thing that lead generators or lead people involved in lead generation or lead buyers believe in, but that also has really meant that the information that people have divulged on the podcast is like transparent as well, right? Because it sort of goes all the way down the line. So I think from the guests we've had, that's been a great thing, just the sharing of knowledge and the sort of open kimono, which we used as a thing to promote the podcast has been great. That's been the key thing for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that theme of transparency, which is something we talked about a lot before, but then we kind of made the decision not to try and coach people into saying it. It just actually developed quite early on as a natural theme, almost aside of that, which I think is quite nice. And that's kind of what I've noticed, really, that I know before we've talked about stuff and people have kind of, I'm talking like the last couple of years, we talked about these ideas and people have kind of said, oh, that's great. But then it's always been weighted down by this idea that almost like the industry is not quite ready for it. They know it's coming, but they don't quite want to embrace it. I'm talking like, a few years ago, whereas one thing I've noticed is I feel a little bit like there's a kind of turning of the tides, so to speak, because everyone we've spoken to, they're all doing this now. It's not just like, it's no longer like a thing that's got to be done in the future or like with things changing. It's like they're all doing it now, which I think, I think that's the thing that's struck with me has been really interesting. But yeah, enough of the admin. We'll get on with today's show. So for people listening, Simon messages me on Slack all the time. We just send each other messages, and a lot of the time, not even things that require a response. We send each other ideas as we go in throughout the day or whatever. And you sent me one a couple of days ago, Simon, that I'm just going to just quote this because, I don't want to, there's no point in dialing it down. You messaged me just saying, marketing for brands is fucked, ... And then I think you were into something else completely different. We've kind of forgotten, but I've written a little note to come back to this. Because I didn't require a response, I kind of thought, well, that's quite interesting. Let's delve deeper onto the show rather than doing it via on Slack. Let's put it on here. So, marketing for brands is fucked. Why? Can you explain that a little bit more? What you mean by that?
Who knows what mind frame I was in at the time, but it was. I think it was more around lead generation. So, 2 points within that. So, one is just generating leads for the sake of it to fill a database rather than like having an actual purpose of building a relationship with the prospect or driving sales or trying to get more engagement. It's just literally like an aim, like we want 1 million leads or 1 million people's data in our database. So I think that's one side, and the other is the amount that goes on different types of marketing or advertising for brands. So programmatic, it could be television, radio, different types of advertising. And I'm sure a lot of that works and they get different things from it. But I do wonder how much of it is actually wasted. You know, you have to look at the whole Procter and Gamble thing when they pulled display ads, and it made like zero difference to their bottom line. And when you know, we were talking with Callum from Group M, it was last week, the week before, and he was talking about the budgets for lead gen sometimes, or like most of the time, actually come out of another area where they've either underspent or, you know, they've got some cost saving or something. And so you start wondering, like, lead generation is a massive brand awareness channel as well. You have to run ads, depending on what it is. You know, if you're running SEO, but you're still having like brand awareness on the keyword searches that people are typing in. But that's all totally free, right? Because that's not really the aim of what you're trying to do. You're really trying to generate leads. And the more that you can qualify the leads and the more information that you can give them and the more transparent you are when they sign up, the more likely they are to engage with you, and whether that's to become a sale, communicate with you, or just open your emails more often. And so when you start thinking it this way, and it also builds your database at the same time, it just makes you wonder why they don't just plow most of their money into lead generation and stop thinking of it as like, I don't know, a side channel that comes off like, I don't know, the partnerships budget, or the bit that gets siphoned off. You know, I don't know, we had £1 million TV budget, but we got it for 900 grand. Let's put 100 grand into lead generation. That's I think that was my mind frame when I was sending you that message.
Yeah, I remember reading it, and I just kind of thought, this is a lot to sort of dive into. So we'll just do it on the podcast. I think sometimes it's easier to do that.
I think as well, sorry, I missed the point as well, is that if you start thinking of the cookieless tracking that's now been delayed, and it's going to be in 2022 at some point, I don't know, it keeps moving.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, for me and a few other people I know, lead generation is like an antidote to that, right? Because you've got to start like conversing with people on a one-to-one level. I mean, there's other ways of doing it, you know, that whole flock thing with Google, the sort of safe rooms that people can put their data in and sort of merge it between two companies that they can gather different insights for. The way you can get like different consent, but it's still lead generation that Jay Cromack does. And when you start to think of what the future could look like without some of the like, I don't know, let's call it surveillance technology that's available, you want like real relationships built on transparency, right? And where does that come from? So if you can't get a sale, what's the next best thing? It's a lead, right? And it's like a lead of someone that's genuinely interested in your service, or from hearing from you, or, you know, they want to get your email, or they want a phone call, whatever it is. So I think it's those three things that are the key points.
It's interesting as well, because just going back to Callum, one thing he said was that obviously he works with loads of big brands, and, you know, he identified that probably was the case for Lead Gen, but he said that he's noticed a shift. I can't remember the time frame, but in the last 6 months or so, that brands are starting to allocate more of their budget to Lead Gen. That's not just sort of siphoned away from, you know, affiliate marketing or whatever. Or, like, he's actually noticing that they are increasing their budget for Lead Gen. It'd be interesting whether that's because they're preempting the changes in Google, or whether, you know, they're just seeing results, or you know, we didn't actually dive into that. But so this may indicate that that's sort of happening. But
do you know what I think that could actually be is to do with COVID and probably GDPR. I mean, I'd love to say that I think it could be they've had like massive foresight and thinking about it, but I reckon that what's happened is people's databases have probably been shrunk recently, and this comes back to the sort of point, which is they're focusing on the amount that they've got rather than the relationships with the people they have in the database. Because if you've gone from like 1 million records and suddenly you log in, and when you go back to work, I mean, they'll be doing it all the time, but let's imagine under COVID, everyone's had like, you know, different pressures, and filling up the database might not have been the key thing. But then suddenly they go, we've got 850,000, like we've lost 15% of all our opportunity. That might not be the case. They've lost 15% of people that might not have wanted to hear from them. I mean, all you have to do is look at the way we run our own Actionable database, right? I mean, what's the gross records we have in there? Nearly 10,000. But what, we just cull them back. So we don't even send emails to people who don't engage with them. after like a certain amount of time. And so what you then find is, I mean, that's why when we send them, we get like, 50, 60% open rates constantly. What I'd love to see is if you've got a million strong database of data, you've been sending it all the time, what was the engagement rate? And then what was the engagement rate when you then have made a loss on it? Is it significant? Is it, or have you lost people that weren't engaged anyway?
Yeah, for sure. And another point to that as well is, I mean, it's a bit different when how we do it, but just use that as an example. Because we dialed down the database and only go for the kind of most engaged, we can segment it a lot better. Do you know what I mean? We can't, when it's like you don't know who everyone is, there's like 10,000 people, like we can't send bespoke messages to 10,000 people with each, but when we dial down people actually engage, we can segment them and we can sort of customize the content, and then we get better reactions again. So it kind of compounds that. Well, that's quite interesting because, I mean, I think perhaps I was being optimistic, thinking brands are planning for the future. And you're saying,
maybe I'm being too pessimistic.
You're saying they're just playing catch up and reacting to COVID. Maybe it's both, I don't know. But with that in mind, what you're kind of essentially saying there is brands need to start thinking more about lead generation, or thinking like lead generators. So my question now is, why don't they do that? And what would happen if they did do that?
So I think brands would piss lead generation if they ran it like lead generators do. Like they'd take off big time. Imagine, I don't know, think of some of the guests that we've had on, like first ever guest, Joe Williams. Can you imagine if he went to work at a big brand and they said, there's £1 million budget, what are you going to do with it? I mean, you only have to think of what he'd do. You just know he would, because he'd use the brand. But the great thing about the brand is they've built like huge brand awareness already, and they've got like all the long tail stuff sorted out. The SEO that like Sam Dunning mentioned, they have or haven't got, who knows? But he might then focus on that. But then they go for the lead gen side, but using the brand and its asset at the same time. And knowing what we know of brand is the biggest multiplier of ad spend of everything. So imagine you're Nike and Joe Williams and Sam Dunning come in and go, right, we're going to run your lead gen for you.
Got them a job here.
I think it'd just be great. But the reverse is for a lead generator in the system we've spoken about, they're not thinking of the brand, which is, and when we've just mentioned the multiplier effect and the long tail and the sort of first to mind that people have, they don't benefit from that. So there's a sort of flip reversal to it where they both benefit from each other. But it's a lot harder for a lead generator to build a brand than it is for a brand to just start like maximizing their lead gen opportunities.
Sure.
Anyway, I say that their marketing and sales are siloed, so they'd have to sort that out first. So maybe it could be quite difficult.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ignore the lead generator side because I think that's like a separate, possibly separate podcast to talk about that. I don't want to dilute it. So let's just focus on the brands and say, like, for people listening, say there's like a brand listening, or like a CMO of a brand who potentially is listening to this, and he's thinking, maybe, whether it's Google and I'm being optimistic about it, or the kind of changes or whatever it is, they're thinking, let's allocate more budget to lead gen. What would you give us some just actionable tips to kind of get started on that, or just to kind of make the lead gen work for them?
So I think it's good that we spoke to Sam Dunning so recently, because that's the first thing I do, just purely because you don't feel the effect for so long, is really start nailing down some of the keywords that we could rank for SEO. And then you'd probably go just paid media on the same keywords whilst they were ranking anyway. Because then you can just, rank highly and then actually sort out where the best SEO opportunities are going to come from at the same time. But then, it's native, it's affiliates, it's Facebook, Google, it's all the other channels. I just spread the budget as much as you could, but obviously, put the most resources into wherever you can get the sort of either most engagement or the most sales from within your ROI or within your CPA. But another key thing would just be building out landing pages, so making it more like direct response stuff. So rather than just relying on your website or something else, is actually start thinking about like how lead generators do it, and the hooks that they use, and the methodology that they use to actually generate leads and what happens as a result. And whether it's going into a CRM or whether it's going into a call center, you then want like a CRO expert who's going to be looking after the funnel, post them coming in. And so this is why you sort of need the marketing and sales de-siloed, so they can start to think about how to really maximize the conversions from these leads. So that it'd almost be like the front end and the traffic driving is, driving the traffic would be one thing. Then you need like a CRO person or designer working on what the people actually see and how they're going to convert. And then you need marketing and sales aligned post the lead coming in. So if they could wrap those three areas up and sort of concentrate their budgets and efforts in them, it'd be huge.
It'll be interesting to see. Maybe we should explore this more. Obviously, I'm just sort of picking your brains here. Just sort of,
that was a really like fine brushstroke across it, right? I mean,
exactly,
very much.
What else we've done? We I suppose if you go back and listen to the last 24, 25 episodes, right? 25th, we have gone into depth on each, to some degree on each of these, and you could go back and listen to Sam and listen to Joe and all these people, and if you are a brand listening to this or a CMO from a brand or whatever, there are people who are specialists in these areas, and we're kind of just sort of tying it all together. But it will be interesting to see whether what sort of Callum was saying next week does materialize more if brands are starting to put more into lead gen.
Imagine how they'd be able to pivot as well with all their other advertising. So the brands will like launch advertising campaigns that like resonate with certain demographics, and they'll hit different areas. So imagine the lead gen just like perfectly aligned with that as well. So then this idea of like retargeting. So a lot of lead generators use retargeting, right? Because they don't have a brand, and the person that leaves isn't ever going to remember them. And so then if they can hit them with retargeting, it's an opportunity to drive them back in at that point. If you're a brand and you're already trying to generate leads and you've got ads everywhere, I mean, you might still run it, but it doesn't really matter. They're going to know and remember who you are anyway.
Yeah.
If you're Nike and you see a lead gen Nike campaign or an ad for it, that's like half the job done anyway. That's what your problematic's doing.
Yeah, just stick a logo on there. But you don't need a lot of retargeting. Yeah, it's interesting. But we'll say, I think it'll be interesting to see whether this does, just develop more. And obviously we hope that brands, realize there's a massive opportunity in here. But I think, I forget when this goes out, I'm difficult to remember, but I think I just wrote an article about the latest Google updates. Obviously, if you listen to this and you're not signed up to the Databall stuff, we send this kind of stuff out that just kind of looks at the sort of this kind of thing. And it'll be interesting to see if people reacting to that kind of news means they are planning for the future, whether they do start doing this and thinking more like lead generators. But if they do, I think some of those things might be a hard shift, but when they start doing it, they can see amazing results for sure. Cool. Well, thanks for that, Simon. Thanks for going over the rest of the slide.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. And head to another 25. We'll get cracking.
Cool.
Nice one.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast, the show for serious lead generators. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.